Tommy Robinson was a political prisoner. I don't want to go on with it.
Do you really believe that if they left these expertise, this land, this machinery, these techniques were left to black people, that they would just starve themselves and be incapable of farming themselves?
Yes.
You believe that?
Absolutely no doubt about it.
He's called you, quote, a terrible human being, someone who plans evil, someone who's done every crime you can possibly think of. He has also said that he would not introduce you to his kids. There seems to be this, like, sort of, even when you're speaking now, there's this nostalgia for a time where 80% of South Africans who were black were seriously oppressed and marginalized.
So let's say German Shepherds, and you decide you're going to bring in a bunch of terriers or something.
Errol,
They start fighting.
Errol,
They're not the same,
Errol,
so they start
but
fighting.
did you just compare human beings to dogs?
Women and
When
children.
did Mandela kill women and children?
He actually was found guilty of placing bombs. I don't want to get into that. And so
No,
he
I mean,
was sentenced to death.
but I think it's quite important to get into it, because you say that he was guilty of killing women and children, but he was never charged with that. Do you know why Tommy Robinson was put in jail?
It was, again, it's a setup. We proved that it was a setup. I don't want
What
to
was
get
a
into
setup?
that.
No,
Just
I
keep
mean, you
arguing,
say
keep
you don't want to
arguing.
get
It
into
was
it,
a
but I
setup.
mean,
Okay, let's just stop.
I'm going to just look at the camera. I'm going to make a welcome, and then we'll start the interview. 1, 2, 3, clap. Hi, good day. Welcome to another episode of Unapologetic. I'm your host, Ashfaq Kareem. And today I'm speaking to the father of who will most likely be the first trillionaire on Earth. Elon Musk is the guy who's going to be the first trillionaire on Earth, but I'm speaking to Errol Musk, his father. Errol, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Errol, thank you for your time. The audience may not know this, but you've spent at least half an hour working with us to troubleshoot this call, so that we can actually have this interview. And so we're really grateful for that, because, I mean, despite you clearly being quite an important person, you had the time to do that for us. So we thank you for that. Just to sort of start this off with, I've mentioned that, your son may be the first trillionaire on Earth. He's currently worth, depending on the price of stocks and how people are valuing SpaceX at the moment, anywhere between 600 and 850 billion US dollars. It's it's possible that, within a week or less, he could be worth $1 trillion. He may not stay there for a while, but eventually he probably would. Did you think, I understand that you yourself came from quite humble beginnings. Did you ever think when you were growing up as a child that one day you'd be the father of the person who's going to most likely be the first trillionaire on Earth?
No, we never thought like that when I was young. I grew up after the Second World War. Things were very difficult. You became accustomed to the way your parents and your friends' parents had to live. People lived very much on the little bit of money they earned all the time. I, as a young boy, always imagined one day, it must be nice to be better off, because occasionally you did see people who, when I was a child, who seemed to be better off. But generally speaking, I grew up more with an academic urge to justify my existence, to be worth something in terms of, in my case, very much technical things. I was very good at technical things, and so I left university at the age of 22. By that time I was 24. I already had a private airplane, and I had a brand new Mercedes, and 25, my son was born, and I was married to May, and it just continued like that in my life, so that I found a natural aptitude to work with development and understand. It was like I didn't know it was built into me. It was sort of built into me to do this kind of thing. And so by the time I was 30 years of age, I had everything that a person could possibly want. By the time I was 30, my home, which I'd lived in already for about 3 years, is today the home of the European Union ambassador to Southern Africa. So it's probably one of the 5 finest homes in the country. And I bought that when I was 27. So Elon and Kimball were raised in that type of environment, and Tosca. And so they had seen a great deal of things. And certainly by the age of 18, by the time they finished school, they were very capable individuals because we had traveled so much, and it was possible for, under those circumstances, for me to do what very few people could have done at that time. We're talking about 45 years ago, 40 years ago, where I said to Elon, I want you to go and study in the United States. And he completely agreed with me and jumped at the idea. And so at the age of 17, I was able to send him on his own when he wasn't even eligible to drive a car, because it's 18 to drive a car in this country. And I sent him off to America to study. And I knew he would be all right because he had done so much traveling with me. So that is the sort of background. I grew up very poor. My parents, after the war, were refugees. So we lived in a sort of communal house with one room. And we eventually managed to get two rooms. And we were lucky. Most of the people only had one room for the family, for the whole family. And so, but as far
Sure.
as expecting my child to be the richest person in the world, I was always wondering, because as time went by, in those days, I was the provider for everybody. So I was the provider for my brother, my wife's family, my some of relatives of mine. I had to provide for everybody because I was doing very well, and so I did that. And of course, providing for everybody meant I was providing for the children. I never really thought in terms of them ever having to work and do anything for me in return. I never thought of that, and I was more a little bit slow on that. I I imagined they would get jobs after they finished studies in America. They all studied in America, all three of them, and I imagined they would get jobs afterwards. And I was hoping it would be a good job. When he was a young student, that when he took me to the places that he was working at, like the Bank of Nova Scotia, the people clearly held him in very high regard. And for the first time, I was, sidelined, and that was quite interesting to see. After they finished studies, they asked me if they could start, if I had any money to help them start it's 1995, help them start. They graduated at the same time, Elon and Kimball, and the reason was that Elon did a double degree. Anyway, they asked me if I could start them off with some funds on a what do you call it, .com company. Now, of course, in 1995, I had no idea what a .com company was, but I said yes, I will help them. And we had in South Africa at the time gone over to a black government, so South Africa was in a terrible state, something like some of the places must be today that are struggling. I think of what's going on in the Middle East and stuff, and we had everybody was leaving the country. It was very hard, and you couldn't really sell anything. People were giving their homes away to get away from being under a black government, and so I was able to sell. At that point, I had a very big ocean-going yacht, which I paid a lot of money for. I paid about 400,000 for it, and I sold it for 100,000 and sent that money to them. And I managed. The only way I could do it was to send it through third-party people, who I gave them the money here, and then they took a cut on the money, and the cut was then increased by others, and at the end of the day, they received 75,000,
75,000,
something to that
is that
effect.
like rand or dollars or?
No, dollars,
Okay.
dollars, dollars.
Okay. Thanks. We'll come back to the story. You mentioned a few things there. You mentioned about, South Africa changed, the ANC, a democratic government took place. People were leaving the country. Some people would think that, most people look at that and think that was a great thing. South Africa finally got rid of apartheid, and now it was free. You obviously don't seem to have that view. I want to talk about that a bit more. And obviously, I'm a South African too. I think Georgie's told you that, our producer. Um, but before we actually get to the stuff about apartheid, because I think we will speak about that. I mean, there's many people who also believe Elon himself kind of has some sort of white nationalist views. He's aligned himself with Tommy Robinson. He spoke
No,
at Tommy Robinson's march in 2025. What's your response to that?
no, no. I never. The reason I stayed in South Africa, I never wanted my children to leave, but people were faced with difficult situations. We had a country north of us, for example, not one, but one of them was Zimbabwe, which had, which deteriorated to an extent that they were printing 4 billion Zimbabwe dollar notes to buy, which couldn't buy a loaf of bread. So we we were very unsure about the people in South Africa were very unsure about the future. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's easy to understand, and we have in fact managed to carry on for the last 30 years in South Africa, but the country is deteriorating at quite a rate.
Why? What? I mean,
There are no new.
yeah. Finish your
Look,
thought. Finish your thought.
racial affairs are much better now. Racially, things are quite good here. Don't see any racial events here anymore at all. And not that I saw much before, but we don't have any. In that respect, we're at a very good position in South Africa. But as far as running the country is concerned, the ANC put their cronies in, with maybe grade 2 or grade 4, and they make them the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Economics and stuff.
Can you give me
You
examples
can't
of
really
can you give me
do that.
examples of anyone who's grade 2 or grade 4 and became the Minister of Defense?
Well, I think Zuma was grade 2 and he was state president.
I mean, Zuma. I mean,
So,
fair enough. A lot of people can disagree on. I mean, would agree that he was corrupt, etc. But I mean, in his own light, Zuma received quite a astute education. But I mean, the point is, it seems like again, and I mean, I'd want to discuss the Tommy Robinson thing with yourself and Elon, with Elon at least. But there seems to be this like sort of, even when you're speaking now, there's this nostalgia for a time where 80% of South Africans who were black were seriously oppressed and marginalized, and were not given freedom for large parts of the apartheid era. Black people couldn't buy land. They were not allowed there to live in ghettos. They had to carry, and it seems like from your part, there's sort of nostalgia for this era. We hope, like, it
uh,
was, things were better back then, and now things aren't that great. What would your
no,
response to that be?
no, no, that's not true. That's not accurate. No, it's more, wasn't nostalgia. It was a worry that how on earth is the country going to get by under a black government? We've seen the theft and damage that's been done to the country since 1994. Everybody can see it. Everybody's aware of it. So on the other hand, I also say to people, that the ANC hasn't done such a bad job. At least we all sort of around. A lot of us are still around, and we're okay. We haven't had to take to boats and stuff. But people were very, very worried, and you can't take a situation where like a couple of million people were so worried that they gave up everything just to leave, and say that's nothing. That didn't mean anything. Of course, it meant anything. We're sitting in a country today
No, I
where
mean,
the
look,
GDP the GDP
I don't disagree that
the
I don't
GDP is
disagree
about
that South Africa
1%,
has a lot
less
of
than one
problems,
percent.
and that there's. I mean, I don't disagree that South
Yes,
Africa has a
but
lot of
all I'm
problems.
telling
There's
you is
corruption. There's been systemic thing. Yeah, but I mean, are you
yes.
grappling with the fact that, I mean, you also mentioned earlier on that there seems to be racial harmony, 100%. When you look at the rugby field and you look at a bunch of things, there's a lot more racial harmony than there is now. But the average black family in South Africa now still only has 6% of what a white household in South Africa would have. That's 1/16th, right? So it's been, and this is post-apartheid, after 30 years of freedom. So surely,
Yeah.
and that's an indictment on the government itself, right? But I mean, there seems to be so much racial problems still in South Africa. But more specifically, let's. That being said, what do you make about the fact that, in earlier interviews you've mentioned, I saw an interview with you about 18 months ago where you compared Nelson Mandela to Tommy Robinson. You said they're kind of similar. Do you feel that way?
Yes, you have to understand. I went to Mandela's trial when I was in grade 12, when I was in our matriculant class. I went to the trial of Mandela myself on my bicycle. And not only Mandela, but several others. And I was very relieved as a boy. I was interested in that kind of thing. When the death sentences were commuted to life imprisonment at the time, people in the street, on the other hand, were crying. People in the street who'd lost their relatives and had lost their children and so forth were crying and being very unhappy about this decision. But I'm very relieved that the death sentence and such like was commuted. But it's important to understand that there were issues that people had problems with. It's not as though there was nothing at all. And, you know, people wanted to continue, as far as oppressing the blacks were concerned, that's not true. Every black had work. Blacks had owned their homelands, and we were not allowed to buy land in their homelands. And white
Yeah, but
people,
blacks, the
had
homelands
more
was
or less the worst
14%.
land.
The
No,
homelands
the
was the
50%,
homelands
more than
was
50.
14.
No,
No, the homeland was a total of
about
14%. All
50%
the
of the.
homelands was a total. Errol, that's just completely incorrect. The
No,
homelands were 14% of the total land of South Africa. The vast majority of the land, 86%, was black people were forbidden from buying land, or which was traditionally their land there. Right, there was some when they were not in their homelands, when they were not in their Bantustan. This is just basic apartheid. This is just the basic understanding of what apartheid was. That for a vast majority of the period of apartheid, they couldn't buy land in those areas. They had to carry around passes to. They had employment. Their wages were stipulated to be less than white people for the same job. They were given a different type of education. They were not allowed equal access to go to the same universities and study the same things. This was just basic apartheid. This is why it was apartheid. This is why it was abhorrent. This is why the entire international community, boycotted South Africa and put sanctions on South Africa and were relieved that apartheid ended. And it seems to me that there's just
yeah,
a lack of facts in what you're saying. But more specifically, I mean, you have said
no.
previously, you have compared Tommy Robinson to Mandela. What's your response to that? Do you think Tommy Robinson is similar to Mandela?
Well, first of all, let me just correct you there. I'm not giving you incorrect facts. You may as well be calling yourself giving me incorrect facts. I lived here, so I know what I'm talking about.
I mean,
Now, as far as Tommy
I
Robinson,
live there
as far
too.
as
You living there doesn't change the facts, but it's fine. We can agree to disagree.
yes, that's all right. I actually stood for uh, twice for Parliament. For the Progressive Party, what they called, and the object was to do away with apartheid. This was in the 70s and 80s. But so we were not people wanting apartheid. In my family, at any rate, it's also important to remember that we had separate development in South Africa for the white people. So that white people were also given separate development. There were separate nursery schools for English
Yeah,
and Afrikaans,
absolutely,
separate
100%.
primary
But I mean,
schools, separate high schools, separate universities
so
for,
did
for,
that?
for the two white groups,
Yes, sure,
which
but
made
they
which
were
made
both given more privileged access to all of these facilities than
well,
black and
but
non-white people.
well, yes, it in certain instances it could be that, and in certain instances maybe not. But what I would say is that we were all subject to this kind of separate development. As an English-speaking South African, I had absolutely no say in the government. The government is run by the Afrikaans group.
Yeah, but
we
you
had
could
nothing.
vote.
We were,
But you could vote. You could
pardon?
vote for you. But you could vote.
Well, you could vote, but the voting was hopeless. We had elections which we only lost because the numbers were too
Yeah,
small for our
but
side. We
but
could
black
not
people were
change
not allowed
anything.
to vote. They were completely excluded from the election process. Do you not see the difference in
Well,
that?
as the Afrikaners set it up. I don't want to get into this. We'll go too far in one direction, but get back to the point. But the black people were given their own parliaments in their own Zululand,
Yeah,
Transkei,
to rule themselves in their
Botswana. They were
yeah,
given
in
their own
Bantustans. Not
parliament.
they couldn't make laws for the vast majority of blacks who were forced to live and rent land from the
Well,
government in cities where they were forced to work or had to work, forced
yes,
to work
no,
to sustain
no, no, no,
themselves, but
no,
they had to
no,
work
no,
for
no.
extra low wages.
Yes, no. The blacks could have stayed in Zululand, and they could have built up their country, and they could have stayed in the Transkei, the Xhosas, and built up the
You see,
Transkei, or they could have
you see,
stayed in
even now
Botswana
when you say
and built
this,
up
even now when
Botswana.
you say
Just a
this,
minute, please. They could have stayed there, but they didn't want to stay there. They wanted to come to the white areas because there was no work for any black in their own areas. They did not provide work for each other. Only the white people provided work. And that's where we sit today when we have 27 million, according to Business Insider or something, wrote a thing about this. We have about 3 months ago, they said we have 27 million legal foreigners in South Africa working here right now. And when you take that the total population is about 60 million, it's nearly half the population is from above South Africa, coming here to work for who? They come here to work for the small white, Indian, and colored population. Those are the only people that employ them. And so they
yeah,
are
but it,
down
but
here
but it
in
sounds like
their millions.
even now, it sounds like when you're speaking, and I'm not trying to make aspersions. I'm just trying to ask for clarity. It's even now when you're speaking, there's this kind of tone of like maybe it would have been better if these black people stayed in what was their Bantustans, which was just 14% of the total country, even though they were 80% of the population,
Well,
and built that
yeah,
up, and that
I,
now there's
I,
some
I
incapability from black people to run, to govern, to create employment, to create business, not taking
yes,
into consideration any
I,
structural disadvantage. Any of the fact that they were not allowed to own lands and they were not allowed to operate and own businesses for such a long time,
no,
that
no,
now there's obviously a
I
structural
hear you. In the
disadvantage.
white areas, in the white areas, they could be employed, but as you say, they had these rules not to sell or buy land. But I take you up on that. I'm not sure about that 14%. But apart from that,
Have you
the
looked at a map of
situation
South
we have
Africa? Have
right
you seen how
now,
big Botswana and these places were?
yeah. But instead of talking about that time, I'm fully sympathetic with you. I was opposed to everything you are talking about. I wasn't happy with it. Most of my friends were not happy with it. But we were the English-speaking group. We couldn't do anything about it. And
Okay,
but
can
what
can
we
we?
sit in with, but where we are now in South Africa is that we have nearly half the population has moved down from Africa, and they come here in the vain hope, in many cases, I think, of to get work and then send the money back to their countries north of us. And
But
the only
this is
people
this
these
is
illegals get work from are from the white people, the Indian people, and the colored people to a certain extent. And so it's a really very big problem that we have in South Africa. And
I
there
I,
are
I
riots recently trying to, where the local black people are asking, telling the government they've got to get all these illegals back out of South Africa because they're taking the jobs of of theirs. And in town in which I live, which is a mid-sized town, there are absolutely no local black people. Every single black person in this town comes from Zimbabwe. Every single one. And so it's we employ them because they're good workers. Because sometimes you need workers, so we employ them. But this is a bad situation, and the government is doing nothing about
Errol.
it. Nothing at
Errol,
all.
okay, I do understand that South Africa actually has a xenophobic problem when it comes to dealing with immigrants, and that there's a lot of immigrants that move to South Africa. Obviously, there's a lot of problems in Africa. There's been wars, there's economic migrants, and there are a lot of structural problems. The issue I'm taking
Yes.
with is there seems to be this tone that black people are incapable. Black people in South Africa are incapable of being able to self-development, not understanding that there's been a structural disadvantage. And I think this echoes because I want to come back to some of the things that you have said in other interviews where you've compared Tommy Robinson to Mandela. Specifically, do you agree with that comparison? Do you think that Tommy Robinson is like Mandela? What's your reflections on that?
Well, yes, Mandela, killed many people with the things that him and his group did. Women
When
and
did when
children.
did when did
He
Mandela
was
kill women and children?
well before 1963. They planted various bombs around the country, and Mandela particularly was involved in. He was the head of the Umkhonto
Mkhonto
Sizwe, and
Sizwe.
he he
But
actually was found guilty of placing bombs. I don't want to get into that. And so
no,
he
I
was
mean, but no,
sentenced
but
to
no,
death.
but I think
But
it's quite important to get into it because you say that he was guilty of killing women and children, but he was never charged with that. He was charged with
yes, he
something else.
was. He was.
He was charged with
Uh,
he was charged with sabotage and conspiracy to plan guerrilla warfare against military targets. He was never charged
no, no,
with
he
killing
was
women and
actually
children.
found guilty of. No, they
He
were
wasn't
actually
found
found
guilty.
guilty
He
of
wasn't found
killing
guilty.
people.
He admitted to. He pleaded guilty to the act of sabotage and to organizing guerrilla warfare. And so there wasn't even. I mean, he actually pleaded guilty. He didn't take the non guilty plea.
Well, I was there, so
I
I
mean,
want to
you
say,
may be there, but this is what
for
the
everything.
court records say. This is what history books say. I understand that you may have been there, and I understand maybe the people outside the courts were saying that he killed women and children. But I mean, Mandela's famous words, as you know, in his that the whole world probably knows, when he stood in the dock, it ended off by saying, "I fought against white domination and I fought against black domination. I've cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I'm prepared to die for." Now, that's clearly
Yeah.
someone who was striving to have an equal and free society. Do you think? I mean, first your response to that, but secondly, do you think that's what people like Tommy Robinson and other people who your son has aligned with and you have praised are seeking the same thing?
Yes. Yes. Tommy Robinson. When I was when they interviewed me about Tommy Robinson, when things were very active with him, and they were they jailed him without any reason and so forth. I said it's a parallel. It's similar to Mandela, because if somebody had said to someone in 1963 that one day Mandela, who was then, I don't know, 35 years old or something, will one day be the president of South Africa, the people would have laughed at you as a joke. Are you joking? And so, in the same way with Tommy Robinson now, where people are saying he's not right and all that sort of stuff, he will. He's typically, as if you understand the world of politics and history, he's very likely, very possibly one day will be the Prime Minister of England, because that's how it works. It's as simple as that. I didn't
So,
say
so
they
just
were
to
the same
understand,
character.
okay, so you just to understand, so you're saying that you're not saying you're not trying to put them on the same moral standing. You were just saying that Tommy Robinson one day may be the Prime Minister of England. Was that what you were saying, or were you saying that Tommy Robinson? Because you
No,
just said that
I
Tommy
would say
Robinson
that.
was put in. Do you know why Tommy Robinson was put in jail? Because you seem to have said that Tommy Robinson was put in jail for no reason.
Well, we know he was put in jail for no reason because he was released by our lawyers.
No, he was put in jail for 18 months, and he was put in jail for
No, no.
contempt of court. Because what happened was, do you know what happened? Do you know what
Yes.
happened? Do you know why he was in contempt of court?
Our lawyers dealt with it. We paid for the lawyers to
You
defend
mean
Tommy
Elon?
Robinson.
You mean
Uh,
Elon? Your son's lawyers or your lawyers? I'm just or the which who paid for
when
it?
I say our lawyers, we are one family, and we are one family. I have two grown sons, and I'm their father.
Okay, so
So
The
we,
Musk lawyers paid for Tommy Robinson for his defense.
yes, the Musk lawyers
So do you know
proved
why
that
he was put into jail?
that
Do you know why he was put in jail and why he was found in
no, no,
contempt of
no.
court?
It was again, it's a setup. We proved that it was a setup. I don't want
What
to
was
get
the
into
setup?
that.
No,
We'll just keep
I mean, you
arguing,
say
keep
you don't want to
arguing.
get
It
into
was a
it, but I
setup.
mean,
Okay, okay. Let's just stop. Tommy Robinson was a political prisoner. I don't want to go on with it. England is in the hands of the worst government the UK has ever seen. There is no future for England under these people. What they are trying to do to England is extremely hard for English people to understand. 1 million people took to the streets last week to try and stop this half-baked, whatever the
sixty
hell he
thousand
is,
people, according
Rodney
to the it's
Stoddart, from carrying
according to
on.
the police,
He has no support
according
among
to
the
the police,
people. Yes,
it was 60,000 people, not 1 million people, right? And Tom and Robinson was found in contempt of court
16,000.
because he 60,
Yeah,
60, 60,
I saw the
60,000.
videos.
Yeah. There are videos. There's lots of videos, and it looks like well short of 1 million. But Errol, before we get there, Tom and Robinson was found in contempt of court because he was effectively there was a 15-year-old Syrian refugee kid, right? His name is Jamal Hijazi. He was beaten up by other kids while he had his hand in a cast, and Tommy Robinson went on to incite more violence against him by saying that he was, picking on English girls, he was doing bad things to them, all false allegations that the English court found to be false. Right? He even said that Jamal Hijazi was bullying a few other English kids, a few other allegations. All of those things were found to be completely incorrect. He was then ordered to pay $100,000, and a gag order was put on Tommy Robinson so he cannot continue inciting violence against this 15-year-old Syrian kid. When he was in contempt of court for that, then he was put into jail. Right? So, yeah, maybe your lawyers got him
Yes,
out
well,
of jail, right? But this is what Tommy Robinson
yeah.
did. He wasn't put in jail for no reason. There was a 15-year-old Syrian kid who was beaten up,
No, they
right,
find
bullied.
reasons. They find reasons.
So
They, in the
but but
world,
but but but
the
but
people
it's
find reasons.
but but it's clear there's video evidence of this kid being bullied, and there's lots of video evidence of Tommy Robinson saying these things, tweeting about these things, spreading this information. So how could they have found it? I mean,
I've
it
actually
was out there.
yes, I've actually spent quite a lot of time with Tommy Robinson, personally. I have spent quite a lot of
Okay.
time with Tommy Robinson.
And what's your
I happen to know
takeaways from
him
the
quite
time you've
well.
spent with him? Okay, I'm sure you know him quite well. What's your takeaways? I mean, from what you're saying, it seems like you and him would get along quite well.
Yes, we get on very well. Um, there's nothing about Tommy Robinson that alarms me except he's a bit hot-headed and needs to count to 10 before I would say, but that comes with age because he's very young. But no, they have tried to stop Tommy Robinson in many ways, but they haven't succeeded. Tommy Robinson actually, as whether you like it or not, represents the remaining English people in England who want the country to carry on as an English country. That's all.
So you
With
mean an English
English
country?
values.
You mean like English values, or like you mean a white country? I'm just trying to understand. What do you
With
mean by
English
that?
values, like if I wanted to go to Saudi Arabia and I wanted to change Saudi Arabia into England, you know what I mean? When I come with few 40, 50,000 English people and we decide we are going to turn Saudi Arabia into a little England, I don't think the Saudis would like it very much. So we have a situation in England now where you have about 4 million people, I think, have come in from all around the world,
Yeah, but
and they are
when have they
they
come
bring their
in?
own countries. They bring their own values, their own
100%,
country.
100% over the last 40, 50 years, there's been a lot more immigrants into England than, for example, immigrants. I mean, it's debatable because there's a lot of laborers in Saudi Arabia from the subcontinent, right? But yes, if you exclude that amount of those laborers, there's obviously a lot more immigrants in England who've come in over the last 40, 50 years. But they haven't suddenly come into the country. They've come in over a long time. Many of them, all of them legally pay tax. If they don't, they'll be fined, right? So they pay tax. They contribute to the society. A lot of them are doctors and lawyers. They contribute to the NHS. They've definitely improved the food scene in the UK. By many economists, if they study this, they'd be like, if the immigrants actually had to be pushed out or moved out, the English economy would suffer. There wouldn't be enough services provided. So I mean, there's sure one may argue and be like, maybe perhaps immigration hasn't been handled in the best way. Others would disagree with that. But to say that English culture is being deteriorated because of immigrants coming in, most of those immigrants, by the way, are from places that were formerly colonized by the United Kingdom in the first place, right? But I mean, don't you see the problem with that? And then trying to compare to Saudi Arabia,
No,
which has traditionally had its own human rights problem, I mean, it doesn't really help the situation.
no. I think I hear where you're coming from, and I can imagine I seem to be coming from a different direction. No, I think it's reasonable to realize that people in England became, over the last 2,000 years or so, a Christian country and developed a certain way of life. They were not always the best people. They went around conquering the world at one point, for which they, should be blamed, I suppose. But they are now finding themselves being run by people from other countries. Now, I'm not unhappy that I
Who's
think
who's
I
running
read
who's
that
running
17
England?
of the main,
When
well,
was England
17
run
of the
by
main
someone who's not?
cities, 17 of the main cities have Muslim mayors, which
I,
is
I
kind of
wouldn't.
odd, and they fly the Pakistani flag. It's odd. I
A
don't
few
understand
things.
that kind
A
of
few
thing.
things. A few things. I don't think it's major cities. It's probably councils or smaller cities, right? I mean, like Leicester, London's run by Sadiq Khan. But there's definitely not 17 major cities run by Muslims in the UK. But where is this?
Just something I
Where's
read.
this? But where's this thing about they fly the Pakistani flag? I mean, firstly, I don't think they do that
Well,
to
they showed it. They
to.
showed it in one of the cities,
You see,
Birmingham or something, or Leeds. They were
Errol,
flying the Pakistani
Errol,
flag, but
I
it could
think
have been for a national day. It could have been for a national day.
yeah, but you
I'm,
see,
I'm
I
not.
think
I don't. I mean,
yeah,
these
yeah,
are
I
all
get this,
silly
but you see,
things.
it can be silly. It could be silly depending on the intent behind why they're saying it, right? But why it's concerning is because there seems to be a bunch of things that you're continually saying and you take lightly, which aren't exactly true.
Yes.
Like for
No, no, I
example,
don't take it lightly.
like
No,
Mandela was
no.
he was accused. He was killing women and children. This is not. He was the charges brought against him was for sabotage and for planning guerrilla warfare. Now you could say that in guerrilla warfare women and children get killed, but the policy of Umkhonto we Sizwe, which he led, the armed group, was that we would not kill innocent civilians, even men.
But they did.
They stated, yes, I'm sure there were a
They
few
did.
acts of sabotage which occurred, but it was never a policy of theirs to kill women and children. Their policy was to
Okay,
destabilize
but
South
they did.
Africa and bring.
They did.
Yeah, but
Yes, unfortunately, they did.
yes, but
Unfortunately for you, they did.
Mandela personally was never accused of that.
Well, that's your
Even
opinion.
no, I
But
mean even
but
in the
at the
court papers
time,
brought against him, that was not the accusation.
you know, uh, the judges and the legal fraternity dealt with those kind of things.
And obviously you think, I mean, the trial was obviously political. You obviously would agree to that, I'm assuming.
Well, if you look at the people that they put something like 3,000 people in prison over the last year and a half in England, for protesting
Yeah, but
for up to 2.5 years or something.
yes, 100%. I think
And
that's a problem. But why? What are they protesting
totally,
against?
totally politically motivated
Yes, I agree with you on that.
imprisonment. Totally
Why are
political.
they
Eh?
imprisoned? Those people who have been imprisoned for protesting, what have they been protesting against?
They're protesting against bringing in people in rubber
No,
boats in
no.
thousands.
A lot of the people who have been put into jail due to protesting have been protesting Israel's genocide in Gaza. Right? There's
Oh no,
definitely,
but this has been going on long before Gaza.
yeah. I mean,
Long.
yeah, but I just think again, there seems to be a bunch of facts, and like there's an interpretation of them which is skewed.
No, I don't know anything about that aspect. But people were put in prison for um, objecting. One woman was put in prison for, it was a woman, and it was, she was released again, I think, by our attorneys. Um, she was put in prison for saying she wants her country back
Yeah, okay,
on Facebook.
Errol, there's definitely been people who've been in prison because of their protesting along with for anti-immigrant protests. But a lot of
Yeah.
protesters who've actually been locked up in the last 2.5 years, or even if they it's a short sentence or a short time in jail, right, have been doing that. And right now, even if you just look at the news the other day, right, just the protest you're speaking about, there was a pro-Palestine march on the Saturday, this last one, and there was a Unite the Kingdom march led by Tommy Robinson. Most of the politicians are saying that the march that should be banned is the pro-Palestine one. Right, so I do agree with you. There's a problem with free speech in England, and it seems to be going down the drain. But it's not because people are not being allowed to say anti-immigrant things or Islamophobic things. It's because people, generally speaking, have been there's increasing crackdown on people speaking against Israel's genocide, and this has been the trend in the last 2.5 years. Now, I'm not saying there haven't been people locked up because of far right views, but the trend has been that people have been locked up, they've been gagged because of in various ways because of their views on Palestine, and the fact that not even on Palestine, the fact that they're calling out what many genocide experts call is a genocide in Israel, genocide on Palestinians
Yes,
by Israel.
I don't know much about that, so I can't comment on that. But what I would say, though, in terms of England having the difficulties it's got, and Germany and France, I suppose, um, if I were to take 4 million or something like 2 million or something English people, and we move into Saudi Arabia or even any of the other places, UAE and so on, and said, we're going to fly the British flag, we are going to change everything to England our way, and so forth. I think you not to specifically aiming at anybody, you're going to have problems. It's like if you've got a bunch of dogs or something of a certain breed, and you decide you're going to bring in, so let's say German Shepherds, and you decide you're going to bring in a bunch of terriers or something.
Errol,
They start fighting.
Errol,
They're not the same,
Errol,
so they
yeah,
start
but
fighting.
did you just compare human beings to dogs? Did you just
No,
compare
no,
like
no,
like
no.
like our ability? But surely we are better than that. We are able to be like
No,
civilized, and we can
I'm talking
understand
about
different cultures.
species.
Yes. Oh,
No,
so now
no,
you
no,
think
no. I'm
they're
talking
different
about
species. So now you
species.
think
No.
Pakistanis and
When
Bengalis
you,
and Malaysians and British people are different species. I'm trying to understand the metaphor that you made because it's
when
confusing
you
me
bring, if you
because
bring
firstly
people of different cultures, if you bring people of very, very different cultures together, you're obviously going to have difficulty. It's not complicated,
Errol,
obviously. You
Errol,
know, in the
for the
white, among
vast
the white
majority,
world, let me tell you something. In the white world that we had
do
in,
you
let's
think there
say,
were
in
no
South Africa,
multicultural empires in history? Do you think there were no multicultural empires in history? Do you think the Ottoman Empire, for example, wasn't
I
multicultural? Do you think parts of the Roman Empire, for vast swathes of its history, was not multicultural? I mean, multiculturalism is not a new phenomenon. And these nation
Well,
states that you are talking about, German, England, that's actually the new phenomenon. It's only existed for about 200 years, some less. And I mean, for the vast
well,
majority of nationalism is not new, and people's biases and racism are not new. But we as humans have existed in multicultural societies, multicultural cities. There were big multicultural cities in the past for hundreds of years, if
sure.
not thousands of years. So what's the problem? I
Yes,
mean, London seems to be a very
but if,
multicultural
if
city. People are generally quite happy.
but even right now, if you took 2 million people or something, moved into a part of China and said we're not going to abide by
Two
Chinese,
million
we're
people.
going our way,
Yeah, but
and you do
that's not
have that.
happening.
You do have in China right now. You do have in China
I
right
agree
now
with you.
the
Yes, you have a
Uyghurs.
monoculture. Yes, I agree with you. You have a culture where Han Chinese are being elevated, and you have its own nationalistic problems. Similarly, what you've alluded to, I mean, it's different because in the Gulf countries, by the way, in Qatar, in the UAE, not that I'm a fan of some of their policies and whatever, but you actually have a lot of expats. I mean, the local population in those places is like sometimes between 10 and 15%. In the UAE and Qatar, the local population is 10 to 15%. The vast majority are, immigrants from a lot of them are blue collar laborers from the subcontinent, India, Nepal, the Philippines, and there's a lot of white collar laborers from those same countries, but also from Europe, from South Africa, from the USA, from England, from Australia. And those countries are happy with the multiculturalism. They make schemes and they make plans to
Well,
ensure that
there's
there's
no
many people there,
elections in the, yeah.
which
There
is
are no
abhorrent and a
elections in the
problem,
UAE.
which is abhorrent and a problem. But the thing we're contesting right now, which I hope, I mean, I also would love for there to be elections in those countries. But what we are discussing right now is multiculturalism, right? And you were saying that there would be a big problem if a bunch of immigrants went to these countries, and I'm telling you that actually there's a few states in the region, right, that actually have built their entire economies around the idea that most of the people who live there are immigrants.
Well,
Saudi Arabia is different because it's a very big country. And yes, it does have a very conservative culture and it does have a problem with human rights and it does have a problem with freedom, which I'm sure the West wouldn't want to look at as a great example of how they should govern themselves.
now, if you take yourself, are you an Arabic
Sorry,
background or something?
your sound's just gone
Are
off for a
you
while. You said, am I?
so? Can you hear me?
Sorry, I can hear you now. Yes.
So, if I look at you, you look either Italian or Greek or Middle Eastern.
Okay, so I'm actually a brown South African. I'm a South African from Benoni, who my roots are. My heritage is Indian. Yes.
I don't know that. All right, but look at you, and you're so well spoken. I would say to you, if you were to move into Zimbabwe yourself right now, you would find, unless you came along with sacks full of money or something, if you were to try and set yourself up in Zimbabwe, you'd have a hard time because these countries are trying to, reestablish, themselves as black communities, things like that. It's not to say it's bad. It's not that it's bad or anything like that. But you know, people gather to among their own people. That's the thing.
Errol, yeah, but you
To
seem
be
to be
with its own
saying
people.
yeah, but you seem to be saying that we should all sort of regress to wanting to be with our own kind, and you seem to be very
No,
upset
I'm
with
not
the
saying you
idea of
want.
us being mixing.
No, I'm saying people do that. I say people do that. I don't say we want to do it. They do it.
Okay, 100% people
Just
do
do
that,
it.
but yeah, but people do that, but there's a difference between no one's stopping Tommy Robinson or all the white people in England from being with each other. The problem is where there's offense is when people say you need to get out, right? If
Yeah.
no one's going to stop you from being together. White South Africans can be together as much as they want. Most don't want to be together. They want to be in society. Some probably do. They want to be free. They I mean, there's all sorts of economic benefits from being able to trade with people who are different cultures to you, different races to you. There's all sorts of sociological benefits, cultural benefits, right? And this is the
Oh,
issue.
I agree.
No one's stopping anyone. No one's stopping anyone from any sort of race or community sector from being together and keeping to themselves. The
No.
issue is when they say you need to get out. That's the problem.
Well, each situation has its own set of circumstances, I suppose. Um, in South Africa now, um, I've no intention of leaving the country. I'm happy. I get on very well with the black people. Um, I did a very big black podcast with one of the big guys on Friday, and they come here, and when they leave, they all insist. Seven of them or so. They all insist on me actually hugging them. I must hug them, and we hug and everything. So I don't have a problem, but I see that people tend to have problems, and I look at the problems that they have, and I try to pinpoint the reason. And in England, I was in London last year, and I was asked to speak at the Oxford Union, you know, at Oxford University. And the subject was, should all whites be evicted from Africa? You know, that was the subject for the debate at Oxford University, at Oxford Union. So I was the only one chosen to speak against that idea. I mean, they simply assumed I would speak against that idea. So I said, all right, I'll speak against that idea. And, the other speakers got up, and the hall was a complete shambles of noise and drumming and people shouting, whites must go, whites must go, whites must go. I couldn't believe it was actually Oxford University. And then when I spoke, thankfully, everybody was dead quiet. And I simply said that um, if um, if the whites leave Africa, and I was thinking more or less of South Africa because I said most whites already left other places in Africa, then what will happen to the food production? Because the food production in South Africa, for example, is fantastic. And it's the result of extremely capable Afrikaans, mostly farmers who have got the art of farming in this dry country to a fine art over 400 years. And if these people leave, then the population is going to go back to what it was. The black population will go back to what it was 100 years ago. And the
So
black population
so
in
do you
South
really
Africa
think?
100 years ago
So
was
I hear what you're saying.
800,000. So it would go back from 50 million, 58 million, back to 800,000 because there's no food to eat. And I know this is true
Errol,
in some respect because I have been in Zambia and Zimbabwe, and with many people there. I've aircraft and I fly there. I've many interests, had many interests over the years. The people in those places in the rural areas are starving to death as we speak.
Errol, a few things, right? So Zimbabwe and Zambia's populations have also increased in the last 100 years. And yes, while there are acute problems
No.
in Zimbabwe and Zambia, the people are eating. Secondly, and this is more important, if the white people in South Africa are good farmers, this is well known, but they also own the farming lands and they own the farming machinery, and as a result, they own the farming know-how. Do you really believe that if they left, and if these expertise, this land, this machinery, these techniques were left to black people, that they would just starve themselves and be incapable of farming themselves?
Yes,
You believe that?
absolutely no doubt about it.
Sorry, your
No doubt
so,
whatsoever.
sorry,
Because it's already
your sound just
happened.
went.
It's the town sound off. No, absolutely, that will happen. And it's already happened in Zimbabwe, for example, and you don't even want to think about Malawi. It's so poor that there's just not words for it. But
So all of this is because black people
last
don't know
week,
how to farm. So is it the reason for this because black people don't know how to
no,
farm?
no, 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 I didn't say they don't. They don't like farming, maybe, but I don't know if they don't. I don't know if they can't, but they don't like it. That they are subsistence farmers, but by nature.
So
But
it's not because the big farm the big farming lands are owned by white people or white corporations.
well, big farms in South Africa have been bought out and handed to black farmers, and of those,
Majority of the
most of them are
farmland,
now
majority of the farmland is still
now
owned by
most of
white
those.
farmers.
No, no, there have been large farms bought and placed under black control. They're now defunct. Black farms that are working have been started again by contractors, white contractors. It's not to say anybody's
Seven,
bad or good. It's what they
Seventy-two
are, what
percent
their
in South
culture
Africa.
is about.
In South Africa,
So
10% of the
last week,
population is white. In South Africa, 10% of the population is white. The white people own 72% of all the private land in South Africa. That's just a stat that's real.
well, nobody gave me any land, so I don't know how that happened. That
But you were
I'm one
allowed
of
to buy
those.
land. When's the first time you purchased a house, Daryl?
No, I can buy land in. I could buy land, I suppose, in a white area. But I just wanted to mention something before we go off it. Last week, the president of Zimbabwe put out a notice which was spread out in the newspapers and everything, inviting white farmers to come back to Zimbabwe and farm, and he will return their farms to them. And the Zimbabwe government has set aside $150 million to assist white farmers in re-establishing their farms. This was last week. The same thing has been happening in Zambia for a long time. So at least 10 years already now, white farming has taken a big grip. They're quite good at farming. It's not about being good or bad. They just happen to have that ability.
Yeah, because there's a historical advantage. Do you not see that? Do you not see that
Well, they have
historically they had
400 years
access
of
to the
farming
farms?
in Africa. 400 years of farming in a
Er,
country where you might get rain one year, not the next. You know,
yes, okay,
that's,
Errol, I don't. I'm not disagreeing with you that generally white farmers in South Africa are good at farming. I agree with that. I'm saying, do you not see that that's because there's
yeah,
been a
they're good.
structural advantage? There's a structural advantage to that because they managed to own the knowledge, the techniques. It's been handed down that skill set, right? And black people literally, you mentioned that they are subsistence farmers. That is not true. There are many countries in Africa where black people run very big and successful farms. There's a big weather problem in
Where?
Africa on the whole.
Where?
How do you think all the people of Kenya eat? Do you think there's no farms that function
Well, I
in
can
big
tell you
countries
that.
like Kenya and Nigeria? Nigeria has a population of 200 million people. Where do you think they get their food from?
Well, it's a bit far away for me, but I know that Zimbabwe imports their food, and they get a lot of free food has been given to Zimbabwe and Zambia by the people of the United States. I've been there when the food has been delivered. I, you know,
Okay,
I'm not
so
saying
Errol,
people are good or bad. People have different talents. Some people
okay,
are set up by nature over history to be a group of maybe 2 or 3 thousand. Other people develop the ability to be a group of many thousands. Other people develop the
so who
ability
are
to
the
be
people?
millions.
Who are the people who have been developed to be millions, and who are the people who are developed to be less? You said some
To
people
be
have been
large,
developed to
large numbers.
be. Yeah, just this is interesting to me because I mean this is just enlighten me.
Well, I would say the Indians, the Chinese, the Europeans um, had developed heavily populated uh, places over the hundreds of years that passed. When you went to other places like India, North America, you found the Indian people, the Red Indians, or whatever you call them. living in small groups, not because they were not sustained. They didn't have large um, setups to sustain them. In order to have a community of millions, you have to have an incredibly advanced way of managing millions. It's not the same
Errol.
as being a small group.
Okay, Errol,
So,
I think just regarding the way we think about this. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but just regarding, I mean, the idea that some people have, based on their race and their culture, innate talents to become larger, and not because they were because they lived in big cities that were situated in the center of big trading routes, because they were the center of big civilizations.
yeah,
I just think we're going to disagree on that. But what I do think is interesting is there's an interesting story I heard you talk about on a podcast where you were almost killed. You and your at the time your daughter who was 6 years old was almost killed, and this was in South
yeah,
Africa. Do you wanna tell us the story?
yeah. Well, this was back in 1998, so it was after 1994. And after 1994, circumstances in the area where I lived at the time, which was Johannesburg, northern suburbs, or Sandton, um, after 1994, um, circumstances deteriorated terribly, and people were um, being shot and killed at random, um, every day, and every night, and a lot of the time it was not political. It was just gangs looking at easy targets, knowing that there are no police to do anything about it. At that time, we did start building up private police groups, but not at first. And so quite a few of my friends were shot dead in their home. And then the home was pillaged and the women were raped and stuff. And this happened at an alarming rate. And I remember one day driving into the area where I had a horse farm. I had 12 acres and a horse farm in Santon. And to get to my place, there was a shortcut to go through what was called Lone Hill housing. And one day I drove in, and it was a shortcut up to my place. And there was a big white sheet across the end of at the crossroads. And it looked like a drive-in cinema screen. It was so big, very big. And painted on this was, "Do you want to die?" in blue letters. And then it said, "If you do not want to die, then you must come to the um, residence meeting at such and such a hall tonight," you know, because that's how bad it had become. So I I lived where I lived with the farms. mm, I didn't. I put an electric fence all the way around my home, 2 meters high. That helped a lot. And then other people put rolls of razor wire, like 6, 7 feet high, um, piles of razor wire, like piles of rose wire, piles of razor wire, and that's how we sort of managed. I carried a weapon around all the time because of the circumstances, and then at that by that time, the four people at the end of my I was in a road that carried my farm across both sides of the road, and at the end of the road, on each end of the road, there were houses, and at the end of each of those houses had been shot dead. The people had already been shot dead in those four houses, including the Costa Rican ambassador. So then I went there one night. I wasn't actually using that house anymore on that farm. I was renting it out. And I went there one night, and I took my daughter with me because they were painting for me. Some Zimbabweans painting the place for me for possibly new tenants. So I went over at 5 in the evening to see how they were doing from Pretoria, because we'd moved to Pretoria. It was safer. And then took my daughter with me, and the boys left, the men left who were painting, And luckily, we put the lights on in the whole house because we wanted to see the big house, what the painting looked like. And my daughter wanted to, we used to live there, so my daughter wanted to have a bath. So she went to the main bedroom. We had no towels or anything, but she wanted to have a bath. She was 6. She jumped into the I ran a little hot water for her, and she jumped into the bath. And I had I carried a revolver, a Magnum, what they call a Magnum. I carry that, and I was many years in the military, so I'm quite capable of shooting. I won the South African Defence Force shooting championship for once. Anyway, I put the gun on the shelf and so that it was out of reach of her. And then I heard some noises in the lounge of the house. I went up to the lounge, and in the lounge was standing about 7 or 8. I couldn't see them all clearly. 7 or 8 black men. And my immediate reaction was, do they want to rent? At the same time, I was wondering how they managed to get through the electric fence. But they didn't reply to me, except the one in the front with a big smile raised his left arm, and he was wearing a black jacket. I didn't see the gun. I only saw the sparks come out from his hand, and he took a shot at me from the hip, and he shot out a big window behind me. And I realized what was happening. I then was able to run back down the passage, long passage of this house, and get my weapon. And then I went back to the passage, and as they were coming down the passage, I was able to shoot with this gun. Now, the first bullet went through the head of the first guy that tried to shoot me, but it was a dum-dum. So then it breaks up into about 10 pieces. And the 10 pieces went into the people all behind him. So they were, the amount of blood in the house, they all retired or returned to the main lounge where they were screaming and carrying on. And the amount of blood on the floor was just absolutely incredible. And every square inch of the lounge floor was covered in blood, and the walls were covered in blood, up to 2 meters high, with their hands like making blood on the walls. And I waited a while and kept looking up the passage. And at one point, I looked again, and there was one of them was on his knees, and he was waiting for me to look out into the passage. And as we looked out together, I was behind a folding door. We looked out together. He shot and I shot. And when you shoot the way I shoot, I can see where the bullet's going. It went into his groin. And he shot, and the bullet that he shot went into the upright of the folding door. And it would have hit me in the chest. It would have hit me here. But went into the upright of the folding door. And so after that, he scored away. And my daughter and I, there was a bit of quietness. They were screaming a lot, but it was okay enough for my daughter and I, for her to cling to me. In the meantime, she'd been standing behind the bathroom door without any clothes on. She came out. She was very quiet, thank God, and she clung to me. And they'd shot the windows. All their shooting, they shot 52 rounds. So the windows of the main bedroom were completely shot out. So I was able to climb out of the windows of the main bedroom through the main picture window because it was gone, and we were able to jump into the garden and escape into the grass and so forth, and then somehow made our way to get out of the property. I managed to squeeze ourselves out of the main gate, and then we were able to try and get help, you know. But there were 3 people killed that night. The first guy that I shot in the head, there was a man behind him who bled to death from being shot in the lungs from the remains of the bullet. Bear in mind, I didn't like any of this. I never asked for it, and they intended to kill me. You know.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. I'm sure
So
that's quite a traumatic thing and event that occurred.
yes, and I think they would have, we know what they would have done to my daughter is hard to imagine.
What do you mean by
But
that? What do you mean by that?
well, the question of muti and stuff like that. If you they believe in muti. You can look it up.
I'm a
Muti,
South African, so I
MUTI.
know what it is, but maybe you can explain to our audience.
Well, muti is black. What do you call it? Witch doctor stuff. Where if they have a piece of this or piece of that in their possession, it's not really rocket
What do you
science.
mean by piece of this
They,
or piece of that? Just to explain.
well, a piece of my daughter's body, and or if they eat a piece or something, and so this is not new. This has been in human. This has happened in human societies for thousands of years. So it's not like it's a new thing. And I was told. It never occurred to me at the time, but I was told that I was lucky that that is very likely what would have happened to my daughter.
Errol, okay, I appreciate that this was probably a very traumatizing event, and that you were attacked and under attack. But there's a few things again, and I mentioned this earlier, that it just seems to be in the things that you're saying, which seem to have some sort of structural bias. So you started off the story by saying that after '94 there was a lot of violence in South Africa, and I'm sure that's how you recollect
Oh.
it, right? The official stats say something else. The official stats say that between 1980 and 1994, right? And I know you're chuckling, right? But between 1980 and 1994, there,
It's
there
funny.
were 52 murders per 100,000 people in South Africa between 1980 and 1994. It peaked in 1993 with 70, right? By the time this happens in 1998, it's still very high, it's 52. But from 2004 to 2024, there were 37 murders per 100,000 people per year. The insinuation that, these black people would have made muti out of your daughter, this does occur in South Africa. Unfortunately, South Africa, as you have mentioned a lot of times, and it's been going on, as I mentioned, from as early as the 70s or even before that, has a very high murder rate. It's about 7 times higher than anywhere else in the world. The
Yes.
global average is 6 per 100,000 people. In South Africa, over the last sort of 40 years or 50 years, it's been at around 40 to 42. So it's about 7 times higher. But
It's about 20,000 a year.
yes, yeah, it's about 20,000 a year. But there's only between 50 and 300, which is, sorry, not 50 and 300, 50 and 200, right? So it's only between 0.2% or 1% of murders end up in muti, right? So while this is a
Oh,
this is a while
I
this is
don't
an
know.
abhorrent practice, this insinuation that there were black people, so most likely my daughter would remain muti out of, which
Well,
I'm sure is a
I'm
terrifying
glad I
thing to
didn't have
deal
to
with.
take the
No, no,
chance.
which I'm sure is a terrifying thing to consider, right? But this insinuation that, oh, she would have ended up as muti, and you said likely, and so this is just, there seems to be this consistent, uh, internal prejudice and bias, which, I just think maybe needs a bit of addressing.
So you think they would have just shot her dead and left her for dead?
I'm not sure, right? And I'm sure it was horrible, right? But they seem to have been
Yeah.
people who came to you on your farm, so they probably wanted to take something from you, steal something from you. There have been cases of I know people personally who have been subject to horrible crimes in South Africa as a South African. People in my neighborhood, distant family, people who are friends of family, and I've heard horrible stories, right? And that's an abhorrent crime, right? But the idea that most likely, I mean, I don't think they came here to make muti, because if they came to make muti, then they would have, I mean, who knows,
No, no.
right? But this
But they
insinuation,
caught my daughter.
yes, but like
What
I
I'm
said,
saying is very
0.2% or 1%.
simple. What I'm telling you is very simple. It's not complicated.
What's not complicated?
You know.
No. Like I say, I'm sure this was a very tragic thing that occurred to you, and very difficult. But the insinuation that most likely your daughter would have ended up as muti, I just think carries with it. While it's or these people who are here to make muti, it just carries with
No,
it a lot
I
of
would say,
a
I
lot of
would say
undertones which people would find
maybe
problematic.
they would have just shot her. Yeah, maybe they'd have just shot her through the head or something,
Which would have been
and
abhorrent and
nothing
horrible.
more.
Which would have been horrible. Which would have been horrible.
Yeah, maybe
And,
they
and
could have
and
just shot her in
thankfully
each eye or something.
and thankfully that didn't
Um,
happen.
but but I was told that the likelihood was that they would have used her for Muti. But you
Okay, but
talk like
we,
that,
we, we, we
recently. a friend of mine bought a Range Rover here, secondhand. It's about 10 years old. And he took it from one person, and then he the other person died. And I asked the people involved, and they said the person who had bought the Range Rover, a black guy, went to a witch doctor and was very unhappy with the purchase. This is a story I heard a few days ago. Unhappy with the purchase, he went to a witch doctor who cast a spell on the bloke who sold him the Range Rover, and now the Range Rover seller is dead. This is this is a country where
Okay.
they do practice um, what they call, arts, throwing the bones and all that sort of stuff, and
Okay, Errol.
poisons and stuff.
Errol, we only have about 10 minutes left, and I thank you for your time. I just want to return back to Elon, right? To Elon,
Okay.
which is quite a, which I mean, who may soon be a trillionaire. Can you just sort of recollect for me some of your happiest moments with Elon? But at the same time, I'm going to ask the question and then give you time to speak. So just keep that thought. Some of your happy moments with Elon, but also Elon at the same time has written in a book published quite a while ago, and this was also asked you in a previous interview, where he's called you, quote, a terrible human being, someone who plans evil, someone who's done every crime you can possibly think of. He has also said that he would not introduce you to his kids. I know that subsequently you do see Elon and you have met his kids. So there seems to have been a makeup, right? So tell us, so throw back to some of the happiest memories you've had with Elon. Why, at the same time, why did he say these things about you in your mind? And then secondly, how have you healed, or thirdly, how have you healed the relationship? And that's sort of like the final story. And then we can say goodbye. And again, we thank you for your time.
Yes. I have no idea why he came up with stuff like that. No idea. Last year he came up with, he's very young, he's impetuous and a young boy. And if he doesn't get his way, then he does that. And at a school, as a schoolboy, it nearly got him killed doing that. And he came up with this terrible stuff about Trump last year. And then a few years ago, terrible stuff about me, which is ridiculous. But my happiest memory of Elon is perhaps the recent memory of being with him at a Starship launch in Boca Chica in Texas, where they have Space City or something,
What year was this? Was
and
this
we
like
launched
soon? Like
one of the starships.
when was this?
Pardon?
Like it was this like when you say recently, you mean like last year or like 15 years ago or
Last year,
okay.
last year, last year. That was a very pleasant time to be with him. And then at the after party of about 250 SpaceX employees celebrating what was a reasonably good launch, he stopped the proceedings and he said to everyone, "This is my dad, that's me." And then I was standing next to him. And then he said, "My dad taught me everything I know about engineering," which was a very nice thing to say. And I then said, "No, no, you taught yourself a lot of things." So that was a very pleasant time to be with him. And that's quite recently. But he's my son, he's my child. I'm his father, I'm not his pal. I raised him from a little thing into a big man, and he's gone off and he's done his thing, and I'm very pleased with him,
Okay, great.
you know.
Any concluding thoughts or remarks?
Well, as it happens, it's my 80th birthday on Monday, and Elon, Elon insists I throw a party, and so he has sent me $50,000, which is ridiculous to throw a party for such a.
Sorry, your sound's just gone again. Yeah.
It's wrong. I I I can't imagine spending a party, having a party for such an expense. My friends have said to me, "Let's all go to Dubai and bring all the people from Europe that we know to Dubai, and let's have a party in Dubai." And I've never had much parties for myself, but anyway, Elon said to me, "Dad, you only turn 80 once." Now, of course, $50,000 in South Africa is a huge amount of money. It's a life-changing type of money, in South Africa, of course. But anyway, so that's nice.
Okay.
So I'm looking at it.
Errol,
We may do that.
okay. Errol, thank
If
you so
you're in
much for your time.
Dubai, where are you? Are you in London?
I'm in London, yes.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, you could fly me over.
That's good. I was going to invite you if you were in Dubai. But anyway.
Okay. Well,
All right.
Errol, best of luck. When's your birthday? You said next week, right?
On the 25th.
On the 25th. Okay, so quite soon. I mean, we probably I mean, this episode may be out by then. So, but anyway, so
Yes,
happy.
no. But
Yeah.
the time I only received this gift yesterday, or over the weekend rather, and I was unable to make use of it yesterday or the day before, or rather try and put it into my account. And so we decided if we do have a birthday party, it will be maybe only in 3 weeks' time,
Okay.
because of the
Sure.
time it
No
would
worries.
take to plan such a thing.
Okay.
But
Well,
let me
we
finish
know.
also by saying,
Yes.
let me finish also by saying this. I, as a South African, I grew up with bare feet, no toys, no special things, nothing special. I lived in a little room. I had no gifts as a child. I got no milk as a child. It was too expensive. So I know what it is to have a hard time, but not so much a hard time. We were happy, but in our way, it was hard. But because of that, I could be you asking the questions, and you could be me. I could just as well have done the interview that we've done where I am you. And so I understand the points that you make. They are not invalid points. They are very real. We just somehow have to find ways of digesting some of these things and try to come up with a way that things could be better afterwards,
Yep.
in the future. And they have, because I tell people all around the world that if you want to see no racialism, come to South Africa. There's no racism here. I've never seen it lately. I haven't seen it for years. I haven't seen anybody do anything racist. In fact, quite the opposite. People are so good to each other, black to white, white to black, so-called colored, which I don't even agree with that term, to other blacks or to other whites and stuff like that. Everybody's so nice in this country. It's almost hard to believe how kind people are, how decent people are in South Africa today. They're worried because of the ANC's way of pinching and not attending to things, but otherwise the people are very happy.
Okay, Errol Musk, thank you so much for your
Or
time.
not
It's been a
happy.
real pleasure. I
Oh,
mean, I understand what you're
all
saying,
right.
that things are much better now than they once were, and I think I would agree with you on that.
Yes,
I thank you for your time, and I thank you
much
for
better.
bearing with us. I mean, once again, we took about half an hour before this actual call started, just troubleshoot some of the technical stuff, which, as someone approaching 80, we really, really are appreciative for. So thank you for your time, and thank you for engaging in an honest and at times, challenging conversation.
Thank you for your very smart questions.
Thank you.